Okay.
As you want.
Okay.
You ready?
Yes.
Speed.
Seems strange to be rolling through Rome on such a misty and rainy day. To think of the clarity and brilliance of the light in Australia. I'll do my best. I came through Australia the first time in 1978, 15 years ago. And I didn't come the regular way. I came through the back door, so to speak. I was in Indonesia and I was in Bali, and I realized it was not very far to Australia. And I took a very little plane and I went from Denpasar to the city of Darwin, which is the northern city of Australia. It was in December and it was incredibly hot because that's the Australian winter, of course, the Australian summer, of course. I rented a car and I started to drive, and I was completely unprepared for what was going to happen. I had no idea where I was. I didn't know much about Australia. So out of a sudden there was this incredibly wide, empty, red landscape. And then I encountered these people who lived there, the Aboriginals. And I felt for the very first time how old this planet was that I was living on. I realized really for the first time that the time that we live in is so new. When I encountered these people whose culture is now 40,000 years old. And also the landscape was so old and existed for such an incredible long time without ever seeing any of us. So I felt really dwarfed. And at the same time everything was new for me. And I felt freer than ever before. So I knew I had to make a movie in this incredible red continent. And the idea never left me since then. The Australian cities I only met much later. I spent weeks and months in the outback before I ever came into Sydney or Melbourne or Perth. And before I saw some Australian films, and before I encountered Peter Weir, and I saw Picnic at Hanging Rock or The Last Wave, and I met Phil Noyes, who became a good friend of mine, who made the great movie at the time, was called Newsfront. And of course then I saw later the Mad Max trilogy and all the other Australian films. And they have such a great, completely independent film industry, which is neither European nor American. They have great craftsmen, great cameramen, great technicians. It was such a pleasure to shoot there and to work with this Australian crew and to live in the outback and shoot in this vast land for weeks and weeks and weeks. Of course, by now the Australian cinema has really also arrived here in Europe, and of course with the success of Jane Campion and Bruce Beresford and Peter Weir all over the world, the Australian cinema is well known. I get homesick when I talk. I mean, I want to go onto a plane tomorrow. If I talk about Sydney, I just feel I pack my bags and I leave again. Or if I remember the Uranda people who we worked with from a city called Utopia. It's a really small place in the Northern Territory. And these wonderful people who work with us until the end of the world. I also love their painting and the way they started to transform their myth and this unbelievable, I wouldn't say religion, but this unbelievable notion they have of the world and of their past and of their responsibility for the continent. The way they started to transpose this to paintings. I really love that Australian Aboriginal painting. And I have some of them at home in my office, and they remind me constantly of the colors that you see in Australia and of the sky. Yeah, now I have this big frog in my mouth because I really feel terribly homesick. I've traveled so much there. I know almost every road in the middle of Australia. I've been out there for weeks and months, living with the Aboriginals and sleeping every night under the stars, because you don't have to put up a tent. You just sleep on the ground. I remember the first time I went to hunt with them, and we tried to hunt leguan. We didn't catch it, it was too fast. I was happy we didn't catch it because I was so much afraid that we had to kill it. It was such a big, beautiful animal. Such an ancient animal also. In Europe everything is man-made and new. And in Australia everything is made by God. It's so old. I mean, if you've ever seen the Olgas or the Ayers Rock or any of the other mountain formations in the center of Australia, you really come back and look at our own cities differently. They don't really matter as much. If we live in Europe, we think we're so important. But when you get to Australia, everything is put into a different relation. I remember that I shot a concert with only black Aboriginal music in Dublin, in what am I saying, in Darwin. And they make wonderful music, these people. And they're so gay and so innocent and so peaceful. They're the most peaceful people I ever met in my life. If I keep talking, I go buy a ticket. Take me to the next travel agency. I go. Forget Rome. Arrivederci. I'm going to Australia.
Stop. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
It's difficult because when you're no one.
Do you want to bring you to travel agency?
Yes. No, let's go home to the hotel. I have to take my wife.
Yes. It's very cold.
No, it's okay.
Okay. I think it's.